Hello and welcome to the Wildcard Rewind podcast. Week 11 is in the books, and I speak on behalf of every fantasy player out there. Guys, it's getting too close to the end now, and we need to slow it down a little bit. But before we talk about that, let's play the music.
I just want to rewind to when we were young and hard. Back to all those good times. Take me back to the start.
Oh, it is Monday. We have the full crew back in the house. Week 11 is done. I feel like the fantasy season is just flown by, and we're at the point where we're like, 6 weeks off the end now, and we all get to spend the whole off season pretending that we know everything and everyone's going to be the best again. So guys, how are you feeling about week 11 being done? Lewis, how are you feeling about it?
Yeah, it was good fun. It was a fun week. The early window especially was really entertaining. And then we were just talking about this before we got started. The Rams obviously won, which I was very excited by, but then we're not going to do anything this year, so I then wasn't very excited by it because I prefer us to pick higher. You're in that weird stage of the season where, I mean, especially for all three of our teams, you kind of want them to stop winning now. And Paul, we knew this before the season with the Cards and the Rams. Hannah, I think you maybe thought you'd be in a slightly better position at this point.
Very upsetting news. Devastated. I really thought we were on a run. You know, we'd won, 3 or 4 in a row. I thought, right, I reckon we've got a chance to beat the Ravens here this week. And then what does he go and do? He tears a ligament in his wrist. Burrow, why would you do this to me? So I'm on Tankathon now. Come on, let's get a good pick and let's go again next year.
Yeah, and as we were saying before we came on, we all think that that's a great idea, but our NFL teams completely disagree. As I seen with the Cardinals yesterday in the last couple of the last 30 odd seconds of the game, they're trying to win it, and I'm thinking, what are we playing for here? You know, is it pride? It probably is, but ultimately I'd prefer to have the worst pick, and I know we didn't win it, you know, classic Cardinals style, we didn't actually win it, but it was just like, I quite like that number 2 pick, and I can't see the Panthers beating anyone ever again.
Oh yeah,
you know, they are so bad, they look so bad this week. So but before we get into sort of the news and everything, sorry Lewis, I just want to sort of say that this week there is no buys. Weirdly, I'm guessing it's because of the Thanksgiving games and stuff like that there's no buys, but be prepared because next week looks insane for buys. I think there's 6 teams on buy next week, and obviously, just to touch on it a little bit, obviously because of the fact that next week is so big, it's a big week. We're at the last stage of the season and you're all pushing your playoff spots. Look now at players. If you need to pick up people on the waiver wire, do it this week and be that step ahead of everyone else, because next week everyone will be searching the waiver wire for a stand-in player to cover somebody. Check your team for week 12, see how many players you're going to lose, see if you need that cover, and if you need that cover, get that jump on everyone and be on the ball this week. Yes, so has anyone else got anything to add to that week 12 strategy that I've come up with?
I think now is a really good time that like you should know what your team's going to be looking like in terms of playoffs. And obviously, like dynasty, you can be rebuilding or competing. Obviously, in redraft, you should be trying to compete regardless. But like, you should be looking towards playoffs now already. So having a look through different strength of schedules and having a look through like, okay, yeah, this player's on bye here, and then he comes back and he plays so and so bad team, the Panthers. Okay, that's someone I want to target. Just like really start to evaluate your team with the strengths and weaknesses and really start to look to waivers. Like, don't be afraid to roster 2 defenses that match up well for the rest of playoff, because you're not going to regret it if you get suddenly to, you know, week 17, the final matchup, your championship week, and you've suddenly got a defense with an amazing matchup in front of you. Like, start looking at different ways to get an advantage now as we head into the latter bit of the season.
Yeah, I love that. Anything to add to that, Anna?
For me, I would be now starting to look at rostering players for which one injury or problem will mean that they will be fantasy relevant. Like, who cares if you roster Darius Slayton, who's going to give you 5 points a week? Like, he's not going to win you your championship. Like, you want to be getting Rico Dowdle, or here's an example, Zach Charbonnet. Like, now we hear that maybe Kenneth Walker's going to be out for a period of time. If you'd have picked him up already, probably for the peanuts, because everyone's got fed up of rostering him and him doing nothing, he's going to be an immediate starter and probably running back to low end, as a minimum, probably. So they're the kind of players that I want to be. Obviously, you need to have your bye week cover. Of course, next week you're going to need players to play in. But if I've got the space, then I'm going to be looking to try and roster those players rather than anyone else who's going to give me 3, 4, 5 fantasy points.
I have a really cursed dynasty team. And I say that it's in the 1 seed currently. But this season, the team has lost Burrow, Daniel Jones, Mike Williams, Nick Chubb, and J.K. Dobbins, right? But I'm still in the 1 seed, so I'm doing really, really well. It also just lost Mark Andrews. And I made a trade at about 5 o'clock on Sunday because I was thinking, I need to get that out there and replace Burrow because I'm competing and I can make a deal. And obviously also thinking in the back of my head, I'm like, if I make a deal now, I can have players for this week as well, even if I trade away Burrow. And I traded away Joe Burrow and Jaden Reed for Dak Prescott, Dalton Schultz, which obviously helps with not having Mark Andrews, and Kenneth Walker.
Oh, no.
Basically, a good trade, right? But basically, if there's a running back that I have on that team, sell him. It's absolutely cursed.
We need to find out this roster stats.
Hannah, did you notice his subtle brag, how he mentioned he was the number 1 seed and then he had all these injuries and he went, I'm still the number 1 seed. You know what I mean?
Good at fantasy. Like, I don't know. I just pull it off, man. I'm not going to go too much further.
but no, speaking of playoffs, I just want to add that my Scott Fishbowl team has decided that it wants to turn up too little too late. I can't make the playoffs now or anything like that, but my Scott Fishbowl team has decided the last couple of weeks it's going to go absolutely bonkers and score loads of points and be one of the top scorers in the league for the last 2 or 3 weeks, you know what I mean? So great,
Thanks, guys.
But yeah, so moving on, we have mentioned him a little bit. Mark Andrews is out for the rest of the season with an ankle injury. Absolutely gutted for him. I'm gutted for the Ravens. I feel like he's a key part in that offense. And they're having probably one of the better seasons that they've had in the last couple of years as well. So my question for you guys, you both can answer it. What do you do if you're the Andrews owner and you're currently targeting a playoff spot?
So for me, people are immediately going to flock to Isaiah Likely, right? Especially when you have a really talented tight end behind the tight end 1. And I think last year, when Mark Andrews missed a couple of games, Isaiah Likely performed really well. He had 9.4 and then 18.3 PPR points in the 2 weeks. The big thing for me is tight end isn't really a position you can handcuff. That's only really the case for running back because it's not just as simple as next man up. Now, Isaiah Likely is a good player. He is perfectly talented. But the difference between this year and last year is the Ravens have Odell Beckham Jr., the Ravens have Zay Flowers, the Ravens have a new offensive coordinator in Todd Monken. So it's not as simple as Isaiah Likely stepping into the Mark Andrews role and performing as he has. I think you go and make a claim for him because I don't think you have a huge amount of choice if you've just lost Mark Andrews. But looking towards the waiver wire, a few players on there that I'm kind of interested in. I think you just have to stream. You have to play matchups. Jonnu Smith was only rostered in 32% of leagues, and he's like tight end 16 on the season. He's actually performed better in stints with Desmond Rizzo, who is coming back. Michael Mayer is coming on towards the end of the season. Cade Otton, who Hannah is your favorite player. Even someone like Tommy Tremble has scored 3 touchdowns this season, including 1 this week. Basically, the summary being, I think part of this learning could be to go and make a waiver claim for Isaiah Likely, but basically you need to just be praying for a touchdown. If you can get a touchdown from whichever tight end you start, that's fine. There'll be a low tight end one on the week, or go out and make a trade if someone has been rostering 2 of like that Schultz Engram type tier. Then you can go and see if you can nab one of them. But to me, like, I think you just have to hope that whoever you pick up scores a touchdown.
I think that's quite the case with most touchdowns outside of the top maybe 6. I think anyone from the 6, maybe 7 down, if they don't score a touchdown, they're having a crap week.
Yeah.
If they score a touchdown, they're top, touching that sort of top 6 position, So I think if you've lost Andrews, I think you are in that range now where you could flex. You could like waiver wire pick up a lot of a lot of tight ends and hope for it. Like you said with Tommy Tremble, he scored a touchdown this week. It was a bit of a shit touchdown, but he got a touchdown. So all of a sudden he's become a relevant tight end this week. So anything you'd like to add, Hannah? Or
no, I don't think so. I think really it's about evaluating your roster, isn't it? And if basically Mike Andrews was carrying you, then I think you're going to have to try and go and make some sort of trade as best as you can. If you think that you can manage, then yeah, I would stream the position and I would try and do matchups every week. Who's got a favourable matchup and just hope they're going to get a touchdown. Again, Titan Premium, I'd be looking to probably try and trade for someone, if it has that much of a extra value. But yeah, I think it's about evaluating your roster really and saying, can I get away with streaming? And if so, then I would. If I can't, then yeah, I'm going to have to go and try and make a trade.
Yeah, completely agree. But while we're at you, Hannah, we'll move on to the next player who got injured this week, and that is Joe Burrow. He left the game early. Hannah, how do you feel about this?
Devoed.
No, let's forget fantasy. Are you okay?
No, not really. I'm devoed. Look, already I was quite anxious because we'd had a terrible start to the season with his calf and we were quite behind on the 8 ball, really. Like this, if we'd have won last week and we'd beaten the Texans, I would have felt much better. But because we'd lost, this was a must-win game for us, really. And obviously then he went out really quite early on. We kind of had the game where we wanted it. The Ravens hadn't pulled away. They hadn't run off. We just scored that touchdown. It was like 7-10. So I think we could have made it a game. But obviously, as soon as he went out, what can you do? Look, ultimately, I actually, in one way, I feel relieved because it's very stressful every week when they have to win.
Oh, is it? It must be awful for you every week having to win a game, Welcome to my world where you have to lose a game every week.
But I mean, the thing now is I'm like, actually, well, they're going to lose. So it's much less stressful. I've been a Bengals fan for many years. We were rubbish. And so it was never stressful being a fan because you were like, oh, look, rubbish again. But whereas once they started winning and there's expectations, every week it was really stressful. I'm like, come on, what are you doing? Why are you playing rubbish? Getting very stressed now. Don't need to anymore. I'll get stressed when they win instead.
Paul hasn't really experienced that aside from like a brief stretch where the Cardinals went unbeaten and then absolutely flopped the rest of the season. But the Cardinals have probably been pretty crap for the majority of the time you supported the Paul.
Yeah. 100%. The first year I really got into it and supported the team. We made it to the divisional championship, and I was like, this team's amazing. And I don't think we've ever been back since or even close. And in my time, we've had the number 1 pick, and we've just made some really, really awful decisions. So I'm just looking at the Bengals rest of the season. So you've got the Steelers, the Jags, the Colts, the Vikings, the Steelers again, and the Chiefs week 17. So So
that game's going to be rubbish now, isn't it? I mean,
that's-
that was the
yeah.
epitome, wasn't it? That game.
Yeah, whoever has the ball last is going to win, sort of thing, you know. And now it's going to be, let's hope the Bengals get the ball, you know. So,
Yeah. But I mean, to be fair, so there was a lot of discussion about the strength of schedule and how they're now playing all teams that were above 500. But actually, when you look at the teams, most of them haven't been playing that well. The Browns are like our Achilles heel. We just always lose to the Browns, always. We just can't seem to beat them at all. But I think, had we had Burrow, I certainly think the 2 Steelers games, the Colts.
I think you could genuinely still beat the Steelers. The Steelers are the best, shittest team ever because they are so bad, and somehow they get these results. Aren't they like 6-4 or something, or 6 on the season? You're like, how?
I know.
They're really shit,
they're
but-
going to get in the playoffs. Although now that the Browns beat them last week, they might just, eventually start to kind of fall apart and nudge out. But, again, the Browns, I mean, I know why they're doing it because of their amazing defense. But I mean, this offense is pretty with Watson and without Watson. They're kind of managing to piece it together and, not fall apart. And the defense does the rest.
Yeah, the Joe Flacco led Browns, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's going to be when they go one and done in the playoffs.
Joe Flacco should have been starting for the Jets this year, man.
I love the fact that Joe Flacco is still relevant, that he keeps appearing, and he's like, oh, he's signed with them. Oh, he's going to make another start in the season,
He's going to go on and win a Super Bowl with the Browns now, isn't he?
And then start for them again next year. And be the long-term starter.
So funny.
Hilarious.
It'll be so funny. But yeah, guys. So last week me and Hannah, you spoke about we're sort of halfway through. Well, we're past halfway through now, and we are rapidly approaching the fantasy playoffs. So I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the top fantasy performance of the season so far, and whether this reflects our off-season thoughts and our expectations. Last week we went through QBs and running backs, and this week we are going to go through wide receivers and tight ends and sort of have a quick discussion about them. So your top 5 wide receivers so far are number 5, AJ Brown, number 4, Stephon Diggs, number 3, CeeDee Lamb, number 2, Keenan Allen, and number 1, Tyreek Hill himself. I'll just give you my thoughts to start with before we come to you. I'm thinking that's quite chalky, and I kind of think that's, maybe Keenan Allen's a bit higher than I thought he might have been, but to me, they're 5 people that I kind of expected to see in the top 5. What's your guys' opinion on this?
Yeah, I think the interesting one to me is Keenan Allen more than anything else. So I just went to take a look at ADP coming into the year, and this ADP data is taken from quite late on, so it was after Cups. After Cup was already starting to be injured. So if you look here, Tyreek Hill was the wide receiver 3, Diggs the wide receiver 4. AJ Brown was the wide receiver 5. CeeDee Lamb was going as the wide receiver 6. So there you go. That all makes sense. We were drafting them around the right place. Obviously, JJ and Chase have struggled due to injuries, whether their own or whether to quarterbacks. Keenan Allen was going as the wide receiver 21. He was going behind Christian Watson. That's the one to me.
Screaming value.
Yeah, that especially in redraft, but even in Dynasty, if you're competing, man, that was one that Keenan Allen was never going to finish at wide receiver 21. His floor was probably around wide receiver 10. And it's really interesting because the Chargers offense is really struggling. I mean, the Chargers whole team is really struggling. But getting someone that has a really high floor, and especially with the injuries around him and the sheer incompetence of Quentin Johnston, it kind of makes sense. The narrative was there that when you look at that ADP value, Keenan Allen was never going to finish that low. I don't think we saw him finishing as high as wide receiver 2, partly because the touchdowns have been there this season in a way that they really haven't the last few years. But he's the one there to me that really stands out.
Yeah, I completely agree. Hannah, go on.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think wide receiver 21 is definitely a steal, but I can also see Because sometimes I like to sit back and see, like, why did we feel that Keenan Allen should have been wide receiver 21? And I can see why the narrative was there for him to not be a wide receiver 1 this season, they drafted Quentin Johnston. Everyone got really excited and thought, oh, well, he's going to take a big piece of this offense. Mike Williams also is going to do something. In comes, new offensive coordinator. Maybe he's going to scheme up more downfield things. Keenan Allen, he's not a downfield threat. He's getting older. Maybe he's not going to be as much of the offense as before. So you can see why people would kind of, make that narrative and make that decision. But ultimately, with hindsight, you think that's completely ridiculous. We know that Keenan Allen is a great receiver, and ultimately, they're playing to his strengths, and it's worked. And he's now literally the whole offense pretty much, and still he's producing. Like, it's really impressive what he's doing, because they can basically put 1 million people on him and, the Chargers won't be able to do anything. But he's still producing for fantasy, which I think is, he's done way better than even if we said this could be his ceiling, like you said, Lewis, I think we wouldn't have put him as wide receiver 2.
Yeah, his target share, just having a quick look, I'm pretty confident he's got more than the other, to try and do some quick maths in my head, and I'm not that good at maths, but I'm pretty sure he's got more targets than the other 3 main wide receivers combined. He's had 97 targets, and the next highest targeted wide receiver on the Chargers is Joshua Palmer on 39. So, like, I think there is a question that, like, when you have that many targets, that's how you're going to make things happen. If I just have a look, like, yeah, he's got about a 30% target share from Justin Herbert. Like, that's how he's going to have success, because he's never going to be an explosive player. He's like 31 and a slot receiver. The touchdowns coming in and then just having this crazy volume is what's going to make him explode in the way he has.
But also, I think that crazy volume has come to him because, like Hannah said, they drafted Quentin Johnston in round 1. Big star wide receiver in the first round of the draft. Mike Williams going out injured. Then Quentin Johnston is actually not as good as everyone thinks he is. And I think, Austin Eckler missing time. I think he missed 4 or 5 games this season, hasn't he, due to injury stuff. Keenan Allen is the last one there. He is your next. If you're missing all of these players, he's your big guy. He's the one that you're going to keep throwing the ball to. And obviously Justin Herbert trusts him. You look at most QBs, they've got their safety blanket, that player that they can trust on big plays and to get that ball to. And I think Keenan Allen is obviously Justin Herbert's guy in the sense of he's his safety blanket, He's his get out of jail free card. So
now I know we're talking about wide receivers, but just really quickly, Austin Eckler, do you think this is his last season as a running back or being drafted as a running back 1?
Yes.
Do you think he'll be able to perform as a running back 1 again, or do you think that's it now?
Do you know what? Go on, you Lewis, you answer this, and I'm going to find out how well he's doing since he's been back.
He is very touchdown dependent, is I think the answer. He just looks so much slower. There was a play against the Packers where he just looked like he had no juice to him at all. And I just think, he's really getting on now, even though he's got slightly less carries in his legs because he was UDFA and didn't play for a couple of years, really. But I think the Chargers need to look at a real other running back option, even if he still stays as like the passing down specialist and he still can, maintain RB2 volume. He might end up being a little bit of a value next year if he's going around kind of the 3rd, 4th round. But yeah, I think his days as kind of a top running back option are behind him.
I think with what you just said there, Lewis, I think if I could get Austin Eckler, so I'm looking at his numbers now and I'll get to them in a sec, but I think if I could go wide, like QB, wide receiver, and then get Austin Eckler there, I feel like that's a bit of a smash play in my opinion. Yeah. And I'm looking here. So he played the first game, he missed the next 4 due to injury, and then had a bye week in week 5. So since week 6 to 11, I know he's not paying back that value, but he's actually running back 11 since he's been back from his bye week. So actually, them numbers are not that bad. If you take out this week, he goes from running back 11 to running back 8. So going into this week, he was running back 8 for the weeks that he was playing there, you know. So I still think he's got some kind of relevance, and I think people will. Obviously, as a fantasy community, we always look back at the season before and go, "Oh, he finished as running back, I don't know, 19 on the season. I'm not going to take him in the first couple of rounds." Now, if he does drop to me, if I could, like I said, in a super flex draft, if I can go QB, wide receiver, he's definitely somebody. If he's there for me in the 5th round, he's somebody that I'd go, you know what, I kind of like that value because I know what he can do. And if he's still with that Chargers offense, we know what he can do in that team, and we know that they will use him.
I do think how he finishes the season, so like how he plays and performs in the fantasy playoffs, will dictate where he is taken in drafts next
100%.
season.
100%. It will be interesting. But yeah, let's move on from Austin Eckler, the running back, while we were doing the wide receivers, you know. I will talk about the tight ends. So tight end 5, Sam Laporta. Tight end 4, Mark Andrews. Tight end 3, George Kittle. Tight end 2, Travis Kelce. And tight end 1 on the season is TJ Hawkinson. What I will say about this one is take Sam Laporta out of it because nobody knew he was going to be that good. If you put them 4 names as the first 4, I think a lot of people would have said, yeah, in some sort of order, them 4 are the names that you kind of expect to be up there or thereabouts. But let's talk about Sam Laporta and how well he's done this year. Go on, Hannah, I'll let you go first this time. Or is there another running back you want to talk about?
No, I mean, I do think that Sam Laporta has done absolutely fantastically, hasn't he? And it's one of those, isn't it, where is he a kind of outlier? You know, I think now what will happen is people go, oh, Sam Laporta, look how good he was as a rookie. And then they'll draft all rookie tight ends high, thinking that this is the new standard, which I don't think necessarily it is, because Sam Laporta is, yes, Dalton Kincaid is doing pretty well now that, you know, Knox is not in the picture. But Laporta is kind of the only guy really that has produced reliably from the get-go, you know, as a rookie. Everyone else is taking time. And so I think people will jump on him and be like, right, yeah, things are changing. Rookie tight ends can perform now, you know, and so they're going to start drafting them higher than I think necessarily they should be taken. What I'm a little bit surprised about is that Travis Kelce is just not the runaway number 1 like we've seen every other year. You know, he is right in there. Actually, I'm just having a nosy here. So obviously he hasn't played yet this week, but currently TJ Hawkinson has 170 PPR points on the season, and Travis Kelce has 140 PPR points. George Kittle not far behind, 138. Mark Andrews, 135. Like, he's right there in that mix. Whereas historically,
you watch Travis Kelce go out and score 35 points tonight and be tired by the end of tonight.
Probably. But I mean, but like historically, he's been like way out front, you know, like can't even see anyone behind him. You know, he's been the tight end 1 without question. And that has just not been the case this season. And people have been drafting him really highly compared to everyone else. Like Travis Kelce, again, I haven't got ADP data in front of me. I don't know if you still have it in front of you, Lewis, but he will have gone in round 1 or 2 this season. Where did TJ Hawkinson go?
So Travis Kelce was being drafted at 5th overall. TJ Hawkinson was being drafted at 46th overall. So that's midway through the 4th.
So look at what you have paid for him and what you're getting from him. You're actually, you've paid a lot of capital to get Travis Kelce, and he's actually not giving you any kind of positional advantage like you thought he would.
Do you know what? To continue with that, one thing that always got me with Travis Kelce is you could always, every year he finishes as a tight end 1, and you always go, oh, but if he was a wide receiver, he'd be wide receiver 4 or something like that. So you kind of felt like it was a bit like a cheat code because you were getting a top 5 wide receiver in the tight end position and everything like this. And I've just had a look now. If he was in the tight end position, he'd currently be sat as wide receiver 17. With you said 140 points, didn't you?
Yeah, 140 points. Yes,
140 points. That's wide receiver 17 so far. So you know what I mean. I don't. Last year I think when he finished as tight end 1, you were like, oh, if you'd have put his finishes in the wide receiver column, he'd be wide receiver 4. Whereas now I feel like you are. And looking at some of the wide receivers that are up there as the top guys in the PPR. Like you look at somebody like Tyreek Hill, he's on 254 points. You've got Keenan Allen 232 points. You've got CeeDee Lamb 214 points.
And you missed out on all these guys.
You know what I mean?
Crucially, if you just look at ADP, Travis Kelce was going at the 105 and Tyreek Hill's was the 106. Like you actively in most leagues took Kelce over Hill. Like that, and
there's 114 points difference between them.
Yeah,
mate. So let's go with your Austin Eckler thing. Do you think this is the last season that you draft him as a running back? What do you think? Maybe Travis Kelce's value is going to be one of the lowest to drop in a sense of you're not going to take him round 1, round 2, and maybe push it back to like round 3.
I quite confidently would say that he'll still be going at the back of round 1 next year, regardless where he finishes. I think we need to see a huge drop off from him before people start to really, take him later. Although it has.
Where would you take him?
I would probably take him with the first pick of the second round.
So you're saying 201? Who?
Yeah.
Just with your ADP machine that's in front of you, tell me who was 201, 202, 203.
So that would have been AJ Brown, Derek Henry, and Josh Jacobs.
Hang on, say that again?
AJ Brown, Derek Henry, and Josh Jacobs.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'd take him over probably all 3 of them, to be fair.
Not AJ Brown.
Well, I don't know. AJ Brown. Yeah, I suppose AJ Brown's outscoring him at the moment, but Derek Henry and Josh Jacobs, I would not take over Travis Kelce.
But I think I'd be quite happy taking Kelce still as the tight end 1 next year. Like I'm just not taking Hawk over him. And Kelce has missed a game. I think I'd be quite happy taking him. The reason I specifically went for 201 is because I'm like, I think the disadvantage you sit at when your first pick is a tight end, when you're missing out on a top wide receiver or a top running back. But if you've gone out and got another one, if you've gone out and got a positional player, then I can justify doing it, because it should still see the same amount of difference. And Kelce, I think, will still be elite for a good few years. And it says everything you need to know about him, that like him being at the tight end 2 is enough for us to be saying, is it over for him? Like, do we, is this the end for Kelce? That's how elite he's been the last few years.
Yeah, agreed. Is there anyone else on this list you want to talk about, or are we good?
Just very, very quickly, a really interesting thing to me is that TJ Hockenson has not dropped off since Kirk Cousins went out in week 8. The last 3 weeks, that's
because he's got the Dominator.
He's got the Pastronaut. But like, I was worried about him. I have a couple of teams with him in that are doing really well, and I was worried about TJ Hockenson. But he's had 17.4 points, 35.9 points, 11.5 points. Like, it doesn't seem to matter to him that Kirk's out.
Yeah. Agreed. Go on,
just
Hannah.
Really quickly, I just think that George Kittle is always an interesting conversation, because what often we do is we look at the end of the season and go, oh, look, George Kittle, tight end 3 on the season. Didn't he do great? But ultimately, he still has that boom bust profile, and people forget that. And again, if you're drafting him in best ball, great, enjoy the kind of volatility of him, but people draft him highly in redraft and then get upset because he's not performing every week. So I think, again, this is one where you go, oh, yeah, we knew that Kittle was always elite. And yes, when he gets the ball, he is elite. But this season, he has had 4 games where he wasn't even a tight end 2. He was at 26th, 31st, 44th, and tight end 50. Like, he's that bad.
You know what? I'm just looking at his numbers now, and he went 4.9, 6, 16, 1.9, 27.7, 1.1, 13, 23.9 by, and then he's the last 2 weeks have been 20 and 20, to be fair. So
we've played 10 games. He's had 4 games under 10 points and 4 games over 20. Like, it's not. He'll win you a week, but he'll lose you one as well.
He's like a very good version of MVS, isn't he? You know.
And
if he's going to explode, he's going to do it well. You know.
Like, I would much rather have somebody reliable in a redraft league who's going to score me maybe fewer points than having Kittle, just because I don't like the volatility. Like, I don't want you to lose me weeks. Like, I love it when you win me weeks, but it's really irritating when you lose me weeks. Even if overall, actually, you're a net positive for me. Like, it's just too infuriating when I'm sitting there with a loss because George Kittle's got 1 point, when I could have drafted someone else out of a different position that's going to give me less volatility and probably meant I would have won that week.
Week 5, he was going to win you it with 27.7, but week 6, he's lost you the week because he's only put up 1.1.
And again, if he performs in the playoffs, people are just going to go straight back on the bandwagon and, be drafting him in round 3 or whatever. But, he's always going to be volatile.
Yeah. But yeah. Happy days. We've spoke about all the positions now, and we're going to move on to our next segment, which is Rewind the Tape. In this segment, we're going to be discussing things that we've learned from the previous week that have helped us as fantasy managers. Lewis, let's start with you.
I think a big thing to me is that we are now at the stage of the season where you have a big enough sample size to have the evidence of what's in front of you, and that is whether teams are good or bad. And I think it's really easy to go back to preseason expectations a lot of the time. So take, for example, the Chargers and the Texans. The Chargers, is this going to be their year? They brought in Kellen Moore. They brought in this new exciting wide receiver. And they suck. They're on the same record as the Rams, and the Rams are also bad. The Texans we looked at and went, this is a developing team. We don't quite know what CJ Stroud is. And the Texans look absolutely fantastic. I think you just have to, at this point, use the evidence of your eyes and not try and think about, the reputation of a team or the preseason expectations of a team, and make sure that you're actually reacting to things in a way that's in front of you. Like, if a player has busted, don't still be starting them as if, okay, well, I did draft him as my running back 1, so I probably still got to start Derrick Henry. You actually don't. He's actually been quite bad this year. Like, look for some other options. Like, use the evidence of the history of the last 10 weeks and see what's in front of you.
I love that. And the Texans, I just enjoy watching the Texans play. Yeah. I think they're just really exciting to watch. And I don't know if it's because we all love an underdog story, and they came into this and they were like, oh, they're going to be garbage. As a Cardinals fan, I was like, oh, I'm so glad we got their pick next year. They're going to be crap and it's going to be amazing. But it's just so nice to see them actually going out and playing some really amazing football. And I'm a big fan of Tank Dell. Big fan of Tank Dell. I didn't realize how big of a fan I am of Tank Dell, but I'm literally I love that guy. I love that guy, to be fair. Hannah, what have you learned this week?
Well, I mean, it was another week full of injuries, and I think really quite high profile injuries this week. So, I learned that injuries can turn your season around literally on a dime. Like Lewis said, his team, which just lost Burrow and Mark Andrews.
Still number 1 seed, though, yeah?
Well, still the 1 seed.
So he'll win, so it doesn't really matter to him. But to most other normal players, it's going to massively change your whole season. And I think this is where you really realise how important depth on your bench is. And I think sometimes people go, oh, I'm the 1 seed, I'm doing great. I don't need to worry about waivers. you know, all my players are great, but before you know it, 2 have gone down, and then you look at your bench and you're like, oh, this is a really shoddy bench that, you know, is not going to give me anything. And you've missed most of the waivers from early in the season where you could have picked up Puka Nakua, you know, anybody really. I'm trying to think of some other really great smashes. Tank Dell, you know, you could have picked up any of these guys, or some of the running backs we've been discussing. You know, Singletree has done great the last few weeks.
Yeah, he's been really
you know,
good.
if you've missed picking up these players, then you're going to be in trouble when these injuries hit. So always keep an eye on waivers, even if your team is doing really well.
Yeah, I think that's something I've learned with redraft over the last couple of years. If you want to win a league, you have to constantly be active, always active and reacting to everything and moving everything and moving pieces and stuff like that, and always being aware.
Because I do often think, and I think sometimes people get judged for doing this, like picking up players because they might be something. And I think a lot of people sometimes say, oh, this person spent a fortune on it. And I don't advocate for spending all of your fab on a random player that might not do anything. But I do advocate for picking them up and just seeing what they're going to be. You know, if you can spend $2 on them, and so what if they're nothing? Like, if they're nothing, you just drop them next week for someone else. If they're something, you've got them and you can use them.
Yeah. Also, like kind of like what we mentioned at the start, trying to be that step ahead, isn't it? You know, so using that waiver wire to your ability, you may pick up. I'm trying to think of, let's say, sponsor of the show, Raheed Shaheed, say he's available on waivers. You go pick him up this week, and then obviously he has a great week, and then people are like, oh, I need a cover at wide receiver. Maybe I'll go for Raheed Shaheed. Oh, hang on, he was picked up last week by Hannah, you know, and it's like, oh, crap. What else have I got out there? And then you end up going, oh, I'll pick up, you know, Terrace Marshall Jr., you know, and you're just massively disappointed because he's not half as good as Raheed Shaheed, you know. but yeah, so I'll move on to my thing. I was going to mention this last week, Hannah, but we spoke so much that we were running out of time, so I've saved it for this week. Now it's kind of like following on from what you were saying at the start of the show, Lewis, when we were talking about playoffs and stuff like that. I'm looking at this as now the time where I'm trying to get a jump on things. I'm trying to look ahead at playoff matchups and what games I will be targeting. For example, the Eagles in week 15, 16 to 17 play the Seahawks, the Giants, and the Cardinals. Now, in my opinion, they're 3 favorable matchups for the Eagles. And another team that I wanted to mention, but obviously I put this in last week before.
I've just realised now, this is your fault, Paul.
Don't blame me. I didn't hurt Burrow, okay? I didn't hurt Burrow.
It's your fault. You know that the Bengals have these favourable matchups, and now look what's happened.
So I put the Bengals play the Vikings, the Steelers, and the Chiefs. So what I'm going to do is, because I'm so good at working on my feet and thinking quite quickly. So now you target the teams playing the Bengals because they're going to always have the ball because they're just going to throw interceptions. Okay. So target Vikings, Steelers, and Chiefs players. Another way to look at it is the weak teams. So the Giants concede a lot of points. So also I'd look at somebody like the Saints or the Rams. Because they can quite easily. So you sort of get the gist of what I'm saying here. Look at who's playing week 15, 16, 17. If you are a playoff team, now's your time to maybe look at trying to get players that have favorable matchups in week 15, 16, 17. So anyone want to add anything to that?
No.
No,
I think it's a really smart point. And I'm glad
Happy days. So we shall move on to our fantasy stud of the week. Quick little look ahead, and we all nailed this, just saying. So let's have a look at what we did last week. I went for Logan Thomas, who had 5 receptions for 58 yards and is currently sat at tight end 12. This is before the Monday night game. Lewis, you went for Romeo Dobbs, who managed 5 receptions for 53 yards and a touchdown, finishing as wide receiver 16. Hannah, you went for Rashi Rice, who hasn't played yet, but I've just predicted he
No.
had 15 receptions, 212 yards, 3 touchdowns, and he's wide receiver 1. But we can't really judge you on your pick because
No, I realised after last week that I was like, oh, that was a bad choice because they've not played yet. But yeah, I think he's going to be a real stud. So well
Yeah,
done.
he could win me a couple of matchups, you know. So
Yeah, I got this right.
So let's see how well we could do this week. Lewis, go on.
I am really interested in the Rams Cardinals matchup this week. Both teams.
I wouldn't be, mate.
So I remember a few weeks ago we spoke about the fact that you can actually target matchups between bad teams. I think it was after the Broncos Bears games, and the Cardinals are the 12th worst team against the wide receiver position. Matt Stafford looked much healthier and looked, kind of back with it against the Seahawks. I'm intrigued with Cup at least shaken up for Tutu Atwell this week. Last week he didn't have a great performance, but he had one quite bad drop, which would have been quite a huge gain, and then also had 2 DPIs called against him. So if you factor those in potentially, it's a pretty huge week. We have nothing else really at the wide receiver position. Ben Skoranek, Austin Trammell sees a fair amount of snaps, DeMarcus Robinson. So behind Puka, I think Puka's going to get 15 targets if Cup's out. But I'm not putting him as the under the radar star. We've spoken quite a lot about Puka by this point. I think Tutu Atwell could be interesting, and he's going to be available on waivers all across the place. I think if you're shaken up by the most recent injuries, even if you just lost Cup, although we don't know yet whether or not he's going to be missing time. I think if Cup is at least, if he misses or if he's at least shaken up, I think Tutu could potentially have quite a big week.
Yeah. I disagree. I think the Cardinals are going to absolutely hammer you.
When was the last time you absolutely hammered a team?
About 5 years ago. No. When did you go? Whatever it was, 11-0, and then collapse that year. Oh, that was our Super Bowl year, wasn't it? I think it was.
It was.
Yeah. I think we're going to hammer you this week. I think Kyler Murray's going to rush for 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
I can't even convince myself of that. Go on, Hannah. Who's your fantasy stud of the week?
So I'm going to say Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts. They're playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week, who have been ridiculously good against the run, but pretty bad against basically anybody throwing on them. They allow the 4th most points to the wide receiver position so far this season. They also lost their 2 starting cornerbacks and Levante David in last week's game due to injuries. Again, they may be something and nothing, but there's a chance that there's backups in there as well. Josh Downs really has started to get a chemistry, with Gardner Minshew. So I could see Josh Downs doing pretty well this week. I know he was injured just before the bye, but they've had the bye now. So I would hope that he's a bit healthier and ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, I really like this pick. To be fair. Mm-hmm. I've targeted a favourable matchup, and I've gone for Jaden Reed, who actually had a fairly decent week this week. And my phone won't unlock. I was about to read it to you, but my phone has decided that it doesn't want to unlock. So Jaden Reed this week managed 4 receptions, 46 yards, and he also rushed the ball 3 times for 46 yards and a touchdown. And this week they're playing against the Detroit Lions, and as we all know, the Detroit Lions always like to put up plenty of points. So this one could be a bit of I think Jordan Love's going to have to keep airing it out to his wide receivers to try and stay in this game. So I think I fancy a bit of Jaden Reed. So, so there are our fantasy studs. Let's get to our fantasy scares. A quick little look back at last week where we all absolutely nailed this, even though we picked some of the best players in the NFL as our scares. I went for Rashad White, and I probably had the worst day out of all three of us. White had 30 rushing yards and a touchdown and 6 receptions for 28 yards. He's managed to be our RB13 on the week. Obviously, he's scored 6 points just from his receptions and then 6 points from his touchdowns. So I'd say I didn't do as well as you two. Hannah, you went for Jamar Chase, who only managed 2 receptions for 12 yards and a touchdown, finishing as wide receiver 39.
It's like I knew that Burrow was going to get injured, isn't it?
Yeah, and you tried to blame me, you know.
Just super quick though, on Jamar. If you have him on your team, would you start him this week?
Yeah.
And is that because of where you drafted him, or because you think that he ultimately will get the ball because he's the stud on the team?
I think he'll still get fed regardless of how terrible the quarterback is. I think he's talented enough to do enough after the catch as well. Like, I think I'd have to have a lot of depth on the team to not play him.
I think if you bench him this week and it works, I think you would be one of the smartest brains in fantasy football, because something I've always known about fantasy football is you always start your studs. Now, as we've seen, it doesn't matter what QB you've got sometimes. I know Garrett Wilson is just defying all of that completely because his QBs just obviously don't want to throw him the ball. But, you know, I think Jamar Chase is okay. It doesn't matter who's throwing the ball. He's the type of player that if you put it within his region, he's probably going to come down with the ball. And he's a fine play. I think if you bench Jamar Chase this week and win your lineup and he only scores 3 points, I think you're very, very brave.
Yeah,
very brave.
I do think it's an interesting thing, though, isn't it? Because I totally agree that you should start your studs because ultimately they have the talent that they could go off at any time. But sometimes I do think we do that to our detriment, even though we think, this is a bad matchup. Maybe I should sit them. Now, I think the problem is we don't know when those down weeks are going to be, do we? Sometimes they'll have a bad matchup and they'll do amazing. Sometimes they'll have a fantastic matchup and do terrible. And you just don't quite know, if a stud is not going to hit, when that's going to be the case. But I do think that if we could somehow manage to kind of figure that out, then, this always start your studs business, I get it because they're talented, but sometimes I think it's to our detriment that we,
Okay. So what I will say quickly, so most leagues start 2 wide receivers, yeah? Can you name 24 other wide receivers that you'd start before Jamar Chase this week? I think you could name 12, maybe 15, but you're at the point then where you're going, would I start Christian Watson before Jamar Chase? Don't know, so I think
I do totally get it, but I definitely think that there's an edge to be had if you can figure out when a stud is not going to perform. I think the problem is we don't.
If you can figure that out, you're going to win everything.
It's why we've got a whole section based around it.
Yeah. But
we never did get it right. Although
we did this week.
But yeah, quickly because the time's ticking away, and Hannah loves to go off on a tandem.
I just wanted to ask, because we've not mentioned it, Burrow's injury, blah 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 blah. Carry on.
Lewis went for Stephon Diggs, who me and Hannah were both shocked at last week, but he obviously proved us right. He went for 4 receptions for 27 yards. He's currently wide receiver 50.
Is in the number 1 seed.
I'm smart. I'm a smart little guy.
So quickly, Hannah, who's your scare of the week?
Well, I've been a bit naughty here because I've basically gone for the other side of the coin. They're playing Tampa Bay. They're good against the run. I've gone for Jonathan Taylor.
Can't argue with it. Lewis, who is your fancy scare of the week?
I'm not going to talk through it too much because we kind of did all it earlier. But Austin Eckler, playing against the Ravens, who are good against the running back, he saw his lowest touch total of the season last week. It's really been a season to forget for him.
I love it. My my scare of the week is all Bengals players. No, I'm only joking, Hannah. My scare of the week this week is Saquon Barkley, as we've known from the history. Bill Belichick likes to stop the main or the key role in any offense that he plays against, and Saquon Barkley is everything in that offense. And I think if he can stop them, he can beat them. So my scare of the week is Saquon Barkley. Right, so we'll get on to the wild card of the week. These are our hot takes. I said Miami would be so far ahead that they'd bench Tua in the fourth. They got the W, but they made hard work of it, so there was no way they were going to bench him. Lewis said the Panthers were going to beat the Cowboys. Lewis, you're a fool. I can't see the Panthers beating anyone at the moment. Hannah said CeeDee Lamb was going to have more receiving yards than all of the Panthers wide receivers. CD only managed 38 yards, and superstar Adam Thielen managed 70 yards on his own. So let's see what we're thinking could ring true this week. And I've decided we're going to go for a Thanksgiving special. So only the Thursday night games. Please, Hannah, no, Lewis, start us off.
I have said that the Seahawks score less than 11 points against the 49ers. Gino's obviously a little bit shaken up. The 49ers defense is amazing. The Seahawks are bad.
I hope you're wrong. Hannah, let's go to you. The opposite of mine.
Yes, because I'm going to say that the Packers beat the Lions this week. The Lions were a bit shaky in week 11. They only just managed to win against the Bears. So I'm going to say the Packers, they did a bit better this week. They got the W. I'm going to say they beat the Lions.
Okay, I'm happy for the Packers to beat the Lions, but I'm going to say that both David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, however you pronounce his name properly, are both going to score a touchdown, which they both did this week. Quick shout out to Mags, who on his Hot Seat show said start both of them because he thinks they're both going to be fantasy relevant. He was right. But yeah, so with that brings us to the end of the show. Guys, amazing, isn't it? Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on X at Wildcard Rewind, or head over to the YouTube channel and search for the Fantasy Wildcard Podcast Network. Be sure to give us a subscribe while you're there, and tune in next week where we will rewind week 12.